This is Research Like a Pro, episode 160, Research Like a Pro with DNA eCourse, part 3. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogy professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the creators of the Amazon best-selling book, Research Like a Pro, A Genealogist's Guide. I'm Nicole, co-host of the podcast. Join Diana and me as we discuss how to stay organized, make progress in our research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Research Like a Pro.
Hi, Nicole. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you? What have you been doing?
Well, I've been studying an article in the NGSQ, getting ready for an institute on writing. The course is taught by Tom Jones. It's through IGHR, the Georgia Institute. And this is for our class with Angela McGee. And so we are studying an article, and it has some Y-DNA in it. And it's about a man who was an illegitimate child in the early 1800s, I think born 1811 in Tennessee.
Wow.
So it's been super interesting. And I've been kind of jealous of the research because they have all these great Quaker records. And so far, we haven't discovered any Quakers in our ancestry. Maybe we had some way back in our Pennsylvania group, but those records are so good. And I just wish more of my Southern ancestors had Quaker ancestry so we could get some of those records. Oh my goodness, it's been great.
I want to read that. Maybe we'll put the link to that article in the show notes.
Yeah, it's been a good article. And it's interesting because for our class, we are to study it 4 times because, these are complicated articles.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first time is just to get a general idea of the problem. Second time, you're supposed to and read the footnotes. And then the third time, you're to outline the logic. And then the fourth to really look at the evidence. So it's kind of fun to do it that way and have a real deep dive. And also it's recommended to do a diagram because when it's not your own family, sometimes it's hard to keep track of all the relationships and the different generations. So that's my next step. I'm going to draw it all out on Lucid Chart so I can have all these crazy relationships mapped out as I'm studying it. So it's kind of fun to do a deep dive into someone else's research.
It is. I love reading those articles. Although it is challenging. It's hard to really get into it. But by the third or fourth read, you're really into it. So I'm getting ready for my course at IGHR as well. And it's DNA as Genealogical Evidence, an advanced course with Karen Stanberry. And our pre-reading is an article that we've read before in the DNA study group, the one from Borland Genetics. Help, my segments are so sticky. And it was written in June of 2020. And we talked about that in the study group because it's so interesting to think about some small segments could have stuck or lasted for hundreds of years and could indicate an older common ancestor that's really too far back to find.
Yeah, that was kind of illuminating, that whole thought about sticky segments, because I've worked with a little bit of that problem. I know we were trying to triangulate a segment for my Benjamin Cox project and could not find a common ancestor anywhere in this gal's ancestry. And I just have a suspicion it was a sticky segment and that we're really not related. Because it was kind of a small segment. I think it was like under 10 centimorgans, and there was just this one. We did her whole tree and could not find anything. So unless there was some misattributed parentage in there, an adoption or something, it just wasn't really viable.
Yeah, it could be a false segment, or it could have been that it was just sticky and it has lasted for 1,000 years. So your common ancestor is so far back you couldn't find it.
Exactly. And we felt like it wasn't a false positive because we were using GEDmatch and we had done, just the paternal side.
Oh, we're using your dad's phased kit?
Yes, I was using a phase kit. So that kind of takes away some of that possibility of false positives.
Yeah, that's really good.
But I'm thinking now it's just probably sticky.
Well, we didn't mean to chat so long about what we've been working on, but it is exciting to get going in an institute course. It's a virtual course next week. And as it happens, I'm on Pacific time right now in Arizona. So because it's a Georgia institute, the schedule works out perfectly so that I'm only in classes while my kids are at school. And we have year-round school, so they all just went back. So I'll be doing classes at the same time as my kids from 7:30 to 2:30. Isn't that perfect?
That is so great. Wow. That means you have to be up and at it and really ready to go. I know I'm thinking 8:30. I'm 8:30 to 3:30, and that's good for me too. So it's always fun to get ready for these institutes. By the end of the week, you're kind of exhausted, but they are fun.
By the time this comes out, we will have already finished the Institute.
Yes, and then we can report with one of our next podcasts.
Yes. So, announcements. The DNA study group begins this fall, September 1st. This is our Research Like a Pro with DNA group. And if you are wanting to join, it might be full at this point. We only have a couple spots left as of the recording, but you can always email us to join the waiting list because inevitably somebody has to drop out at the last minute. So please let us know if you're wanting to get on the waiting list. And as always, you can join our newsletter to get updates about new blog posts and new podcast episodes and any sales we have going on.
Well, we have our guest Allison Kotter back to talk about her experience with the Research Like a Pro with DNA course. Hi, Allison.
Hi, Diana. Hi, Nicole. Thanks for having me back today.
Oh, we're so excited to talk more about your project. Why don't you just review a little bit, maybe read us your objective and just get us back into what you're researching.
Yeah, so this is for my DNA eCourse, and the objective I wrote was the objective of this research project is to use DNA and genealogical records to determine the biological father of Mariella Parker, born on the 22nd of August, 1877, in Baldwin County, Alabama. Mariella died on the 28th of December, 1950, in Columbus, Muscatine, Georgia. The test taker is 3 generations from the research subject, and autosomal DNA will be applicable. However, third to fourth cousins may not share very much DNA, which could make verifying the exact relationship difficult. The community of this research subject also experienced pedigree collapse, so there may be multiple MRCAs, most recent common ancestors, with the test taker. Mitochondrial DNA is not useful in this case as it is not an unbroken maternal line, and Y-DNA is not useful in this case as it is not an unbroken paternal line. So,
Great.
yeah, it's a lot, but I'm trying to find the father of Mariella Parker.
Right. And I think this is such an interesting case because you thought that there was no problem. The documents showed kind of clearly what was happening, but DNA is starting to show a different story, if I'm remembering right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When I did my traditional records timeline, and I was like, yeah, William Parker is Mary's father. And I had decided that a while ago, but a cousin had reached out to me and told me I was wrong and that Mary was actually a daughter of the first husband of Zillah Beck, and that she adopted the Parker name because she was raised by William Parker. And as I've been looking at the DNA and just kind of learning about the centimorgans and comparing to the shared centimorgan project, it is looking like I have something wrong because the numbers are not working out the way I would think they should if she was William Parker's biological daughter.
Wow, this is such a good example of using DNA to verify your genealogy because even something that seems like a simple slam dunk can be wrong. So I love this. This is so fun.
Yeah, it was kind of at first when I got the message from the cousin, I was like, well, I'm just going to use it to learn DNA and kind of prove my point. And then all of a sudden I was proving their point.
Oh, that's awesome. It's kind of the fun thing about genealogy, all these twists and turns.
Yeah. So after you made the timeline and analyzed all your sources, the next step in Research Like a Pro with DNA is to make a locality guide. So tell us about that step.
Yeah, so I had done research like a pro, the traditional way, multiple times. So I was comfortable with locality guides. And as I was reading it for DNA, something you said is you might want to make multiple for like your hypothesized next generation and things like that. And so I decided to do that. And I'm glad I did. But part of it is I get stuck at the locality guide a lot. So I wanted to make sure I was getting good at getting them done efficiently. So I chose to do one for where Mary was born, which was Baldwin County, Alabama. One where William Parker was born, Galveston County, Texas. So he's hypothesized father number 1. And then hypothesized father number 2, Mr. Barnes, I think is from Covington County, Alabama, because everything I know about him is from Covington County, Alabama. So I decided to focus on those 3 localities.
Yeah, it's tricky sometimes to choose just one, and you don't know where the answer to your research question will be, which locality will have that record that helps you. So sometimes you're researching in multiple places, and it's good to have those locality guides. And I like what you said about trying to do an efficient locality guide. Sometimes we get bogged down in trying to gather everything we can about a location and all the record types. So how did you focus and be efficient with those 3 locations?
So I mainly focused on, I would read the Family Search Wiki and I would pull out anything I found really interesting or helpful or any resources that really caught my eye. I also liked to look at the Family Search catalog to get a quick glance at what kind of records are available in that county. And then the other thing I think is really important for locality guides, or at least has helped me a lot, is reading county histories. I think one of the best things about that locality guides has added to my research is putting myself in the time and place as my ancestors so that I can kind of see the way they're seeing, and it helps me answer questions more efficiently, and it just helps me know what they were thinking probably.
That's a great tip. I like that.
So, when you started with Baldwin County, Alabama, what did you find? It's funny that you have Baldwin County because I am doing a project right now that's been centered in Baldwin too, but about 100 years earlier.
Yeah. Most of the southern counties I work in after the Civil War were like burned, or so a lot of their records don't even start till like 1870. But they actually had no record loss in Baldwin County, according to the Family Search Wiki. And so they had records all the way back to 1809, which I was very excited about. But they did not keep birth records until 1886. And Mary is reported to having been born in 1877. So I didn't think I was going to be able to find a birth record for Mary based on my locality guide. The other thing I did was I read a county history of Baldwin County. And something I found really interesting was it said that the wealthy men would travel between Baldwin County and Galveston County, Texas for business. And I thought that was really interesting since Mary's father, William, or her hypothesized father, was from Galveston County, Texas. So that gave me a connection of maybe how he ended up in Alabama. And then the other thing it said was a big industry was lumber and chopping logs. And that's what William Parker's occupation was on the 1880 census. So I thought that was fun to just kind of learn.
Yeah, that really opened up a few different ideas for research, didn't it? And with Baldwin County being right there on the coast, it makes sense that they would just hop on a steamship and go over to Galveston, also on the coast of Texas. I think sometimes we think that they always just went overland, but no, I think they often traveled by water because it was a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think Galveston County, Texas was a big port, and so was Mobile, Alabama. So it
Mhm.
makes sense for them to travel between the two. I just hadn't made that connection earlier.
I know, isn't it funny how sometimes we don't put our brains to the problem because now we just travel by car, plane. How often do do we think about traveling by ship between cities? But this was a different time.
Yeah.
So next you did your locality guide for Galveston County, Texas. So what did you learn about that?
So another big important part of the locality guide is kind of getting a map and especially seeing surrounding counties. And I learned that that helped me a lot in DNA. But so Galveston was surrounded by Harris County, Texas, Brazoria County, Texas, and Chambers County, Texas. And then it was super fun to read about Galveston County because apparently Galveston is just an island that was horrible to live on at this time. It was just saying that there were hurricanes and there was like the Mexican Wars. And if that wasn't killing you, then the snakes were killing you. And I just thought it was really interesting to read about it. It's interesting because the family story with William Parker is that he was kind of rough and actually ended up killing someone and ran out to Alabama to get away from Texas. And it was interesting reading about Galveston County with that story in mind because I was like, oh, this place is kind of lawless. So it makes sense that our lawless ancestor came from here.
That does make sense.
I'm just laughing because when you were writing about this in the history, it says that Galveston County was a hell island.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun reading it.
Well, your third location was Covington County back in Alabama. What did you learn about Covington County?
So I've been doing a lot of research in Covington County for my 4th generation project. So I already knew a lot. So that was nice. But whenever I am doing a project in an area I've already done, I do like to just relook at my locality guide and see if there's anything I need to add to give myself some context for this story. And so, something I learned was after the Civil War, a lot of people in Covington County actually moved to the Panhandle of Florida for the untapped resources. And it's a different research project. But my hypothesis is that Mr. Barnes died during the Civil War and then his family moved to Florida. Um, but there are barns in Covington County. And so just was trying to remind myself what kind of records were there that I could possibly use to uncover this mystery.
Yeah, and Covington is borders Florida, is that right?
Yeah, it's right on the
Yeah.
panhandle.
Yeah, well, you certainly had some interesting counties, and they're each so different.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important to really think about your county and learn all you can because it does open up your mind to ideas for research, which is why we put the locality guide before a research plan so that you've really explored some thoughts and ideas about it. So that's great.
Yeah, it's definitely helped me a lot in my research as I've added it.
So, with Research Like a Pro with DNA, at this step, we also look at locations where our DNA matches ancestors were from to see if there's anything that intersects. So, what did you find when you started working on that step?
Yeah, so I found that I had two groups of matches. They were either from Alabama and Florida or they were from Texas. So
Huh.
I thought that was extremely interesting since that's what I did. And a lot of them were those surrounding counties from Galveston, Texas.
Hmm.
I think you guys have seen this in your ancestry too, that a lot of people from Alabama actually migrated to Texas. And I was running into that as well. So it's not an automatic answer to my question, but I was definitely noting the matches that were from that part of Texas to kind of explore them further.
Yeah, we have that migration pattern. Well, after you did that, the next step in the DNA process is looking at ethnicity estimates. So I'm curious to see if that helped you at all. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. It really depends so much about your research question.
So, something that was helpful for me with the ethnicity was my mother in law, whose DNA I'm using for the project. She was 30% Norwegian because her mother's side comes from Norwegian immigrants. Then, when I compared that to all these people I had confirmed were descendants through the Parkers or, Mariella's descendants, they had no Norwegian or like very little. So that was cool to decide, okay, so the Norwegian is probably only on my mother in law's maternal line. And then also when I was looking at a match and I was noticing their tree was kind of taking a Italian turn or something like that, I could just look at their ethnicity estimates and look at Leslie's and realize, okay, I can completely ignore the Italian line. I don't think we have hidden Italian here and focus on the line that seems to be British Isles. So that's kind of how I used it. I think there's probably more to use it and I'm still learning. I also liked how Ancestry will sort your matches into additional communities. So one of the communities they had sorted Leslie's into was South Alabama and Florida Panhandle settlers. And when I clicked on that, it showed all the DNA matches that were also in that community, which was helpful because I was like, okay, this family is from this part. So I could look at those matches and decide if they were going to help me.
That can be really helpful as you're trying to go back to that most recent common ancestor to narrow it down. So that's great that you were able to just completely take out the Norwegian side and figure out more about your matches because sometimes you just have no clue who these matches are and how they connect. So that's a great use of ethnicity and the location.
Yeah, I really like that you use the communities as well. That's a neat feature of Ancestry DNA. And sometimes there aren't any communities, but when there are, and they've recently added a lot more, it's really interesting to kind of see who's in the community from the DNA matches and see if that helps you at all. So good job using that.
Yeah, like I said, I'm sure there's more to learn, but I was just trying to play around and figure out what was available.
Great. So that completed lesson 5, locality research and ethnicity. So when you went on to lesson 6, exploring DNA tools and methodology, how did you feel about that one?
I was so overwhelmed. So I started the e-course in January and I finished it in June. And I probably spent 2 months on this lesson just because I was so afraid of it. I had been afraid of DNA for like years as I had heard about it. And then I started it. And this lesson just makes you face DNA head on and all the new learning things. But once I decided to just do it, and writing about it actually helped for the blog post. So in your reflection journal, if you're doing the e-course, I would just write what you're doing as you're doing it. Because then I was like, okay, I understand what's happening. So I didn't need to be so scared.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's helpful to write down kind of the steps you're taking because sometimes the first few times you try a tool, it doesn't work quite right. So
Mm-hmm.
it's helpful to like keep track of what you did and then try something different the next time.
Yeah, I think helping to writing down like, okay, this is what this is supposed to do for me. Because, for example, like segment triangulation, I'd heard about it, sounded cool, but I did not know how I would use it or why I would use it. And so I listened to the lesson multiple times. I did reading. And then when I actually wrote it down, that might just be my learning style. But then I was like, okay, I think I understand this now.
Yeah, that's a really good point that listening and reading is helpful, but when you write it, you have to really think about why it could be useful to you. I think a lot of us have that learning style too. So, which tools did you try out first?
So I decided to try and do a little bit of each. So I did an Autocluster through Genetic Affairs, I did an AutoTree through Genetic Affairs, and then I did try some segment triangulation through GEDmatch. With my Autocluster, we had done clustering in previous lessons, but I hadn't used the Genetic Affairs Autocluster yet. So it uses your family tree DNA matches and it clusters them. And so I got a lot of clusters, and that's all in the blog post. You can see the pictures. And as I started going through each cluster, trying to find the most recent common ancestor, I found that I was finding the Deese family from one of my mother in law's other lines in almost every single cluster. And earlier, I had decided that there was probably some pedigree collapse in this family tree. And this was once again saying, yeah, there is definitely endogamy or something going on because the Deeses are showing up in every single one of these clusters. So it was kind of hard to separate from that.
Wow, yeah, that is really tricky. And with family tree DNA, I'm guessing when you did this, it was before they excluded small segments too. And so that can also
Yeah.
introduce some difficult things that can make your clusters look different. So now that they're not including those small segments, I wonder what it would look like if you did it again. You'll have to try that.
Yeah, I would. I was wondering, you guys might know the answer to this, but does family tree DNA like do more people from other countries use it? Because I was finding a ton of like Norwegian matches on family tree DNA, where I was finding like none on Ancestry. So it seemed like more of the American matches were on Ancestry, whereas more of the international matches were on family tree DNA. But I didn't know if that was just a coincidence or not.
I haven't noticed that with family tree DNA specifically. I have on my heritage is they're kind of known for having more international users. But Ancestry is definitely heavily American. I'm not sure about Family Tree DNA. They just have a smaller database and just a different group of people.
Okay. Yeah, I was just noticing differences between my ancestry matches and my family tree DNA matches.
Yeah, that's a good thing to notice.
And it could also be that there were just some of those families in the Norwegian side that they all decided to test and they chose family tree
Yeah.
DNA. You know, sometimes you just get multiple cousins. There's a genealogist in the family and they reach out to everybody saying, take this test, take this test. And you get a lot of matches. Well, let's talk a little bit about your exploration of the genetic affairs auto tree. So, how did that go for you?
As I did the genetic affairs auto tree, there was a lot of matches on my mother in law's Norwegian line, which was very exciting. We actually need to do a lot of research there, but that was not my objective of the project. But something I liked about the AutoTree was it gave you a list of common ancestors that the other matches had. So it hadn't connected it to your tree, but it was saying, hey, these two people share this common ancestor. And that was really cool to help sort people. And then later, when I would find out, oh, that common ancestor is a descendant of the Becks, I could then sort the matches a little bit better. So I actually used that part of the AutoTree quite a bit as I was sorting through my matches.
That's a great use of that tool. There are so many tools to use. And so I think this portion of the course is really valuable. I think sometimes we get in the habit of just using one tool. We find one that works and we just want to use it over and over. I know I'm kind of guilty of that sometimes. But exploring a lot of different ones is so valuable because you might need to use a different tool for a different project. So I'm glad you just got out of your comfort zone and tried a lot of these tools.
Yeah, and I think that was the point of the lesson I figured out, because at first I was thinking I had to master all of these things and completely understand them. But no, it was just to try them out. And I think once you started trying them out, they became so much less scary and you realized how they could help you. And so I'm glad that the course pushed me to do that.
That's great.
So the last thing you tried was GEDmatch, which I know can be kind of intimidating for people. Tell us about your experience with GEDmatch and segment triangulation.
GEDmatch was definitely something that intimidated me, but I had heard about it so much as such a good tool. So I decided I was going to figure it out. So I did watch some YouTube videos to just kind of get used to how to get around. And then I paid for tier one, which was only $10 a month and totally worth it because I was able to use the segment triangulation tool. And it just led me to, okay, these matches, and I'm going to try and explain it my understanding. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But these matches that I have confirmed are through William Parker or through Zilla Beck shared this segment with Leslie, my mother-in-law. So that probably means that that segment came from the Beck line or the Parker line, whichever one. So then I would compare that segment to the other people she was sharing that segment with who I didn't know the common ancestor with and try and build their trees. So I had a lot of fun poking around on GEDmatch and figuring out all the tools on there. And now that I'm more comfortable with it, I think I will use it for a lot of my projects because there's some really cool tools on there.
Fantastic.
Yeah, something I figured out, a lot of GEDmatch people don't have their trees on there. And I was like, oh, shoot, how am I supposed to do this? But I figured out if I could look and see what company they came from, I could go find them on that website that I was on. So, like Ancestry, I could just go find them. A lot of times they use the same username. And then they would have a tree on Ancestry, or at least a little bit of a tree that I could then build.
Yes, what a great tip. That's exactly what I do as well because there's very few GEDCOMs uploaded to GEDmatch. So you have a lot of people's DNA, you can see the segment, but then you don't know how you're related until you figure out who they are on the other company. And if you have, if you have your mother-in-law's DNA on all the company sites, then you can really find them pretty easily.
Yeah, it's definitely been helpful. The only one I don't have is 23andMe, and I think I want to get that so that we can just have the whole gambit.
Yeah, that's interesting because 23andMe also often doesn't have tree information or seldom do people list their surnames and things. So it's just kind of contacting the person and asking them who is your family. So
That's good to know.
Yeah, but 23andMe has some really great tools. And so it's so worth it. And I found that a lot of adoptees put their DNA on 23andMe. You know, adoptees put their DNA everywhere trying to get those matches. But 23andMe does a really great tool where they will let you see how a match also matches other people. And so sometimes you can find a close match and see that they're matching a first cousin, and that first cousin you can figure out their tree. So it gives you this additional clue about where they fit in. So it's definitely got its own learning curve, but really worthwhile.
That's cool. I liked doing that with GEDmatch too, is viewing the kits as if they were my own. So I couldn't manipulate the kits or anything, but they allow you to run like a segment triangulation as long as you have a kit number. And that was really helpful. I found some additional ancestors through that that were not sharing DNA with Leslie, but seemed to be ancestors of the same family. And it just helped me play around with GEDmatch more, which made me a lot more comfortable with the website.
Great. And I love what you said that you watched a few YouTube videos, because there's some great YouTube videos out there about GEDmatch. And that's my favorite way to learn, is watch a video and then be trying it on my other screen,
Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
They're really great. I'm just such a try it myself person, and then I sometimes get frustrated. I'm like, oh, fine, I'll watch a video.
That's funny, Nicole, because you make such good videos to watch.
It's just like I'm too in a rush, to stop and watch something. My favorite method is to read a set of directions. Like if I can just follow the steps, it's faster. But no, I love videos too, because sometimes it's like, oh, now I see what to do. But I like
Yeah,
what you said about using GEDmatch to run other kits against each other for segment triangulation, because that's really an important part of segment triangulation, is making sure that not only does your mother-in-law match these people on that segment, but do they match each other on that same segment? And when they do, then you have a fully triangulated segment where all three people hopefully descend from the same common ancestor, but you're still kind of working to prove that. But in your conclusion, and when you write up this, like as a proof argument, when you get there, that's going to be like a really important part of it. If you did use segment triangulation as part of your evidence, to be able to show that everybody in the triangulated group match on that segment to each other.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot more I need to learn about it, but I was really grateful for this lesson to get me over my fear of it so that I could just kind of figure out what it was trying to tell me.
that's great. Well, it's been fun talking to you and seeing how someone who had a lot of fear about using DNA has been able to tackle it, because I think a lot of our listeners are in the same boat. They have their DNA results, they go look at it on Ancestry, but really don't know what to do with it. And it can be scary to learn something new. So thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your experience. We're excited to talk with you next time about the next steps in your DNA process.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today.
All right, we'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our book, Research Like a Pro, A Genealogist Guide, on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our Research Like a Pro online course or join our next study group. Learn more at FamilyLocket.com. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our eCourse or study group. If you like what you heard and would like to support this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.